All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. Again, I really start all of my talks with just a really appreciation for my patient panel that has allowed me to really practice medicine in a way that I really believe in and can do things like this. And you guys fund this kind of thing and my YouTube channel, essentially, and all the work that I'm trying to do to not increase your, not just treat your illness, right, but to increase your health and wellness, and really all of Canyon Cities and Fremont counties and whoever else wants to listen to me's health and wellness. So yeah, that's really my goal, mission, vision with all of this. And again, this community has really allowed me to do that in I think unique and special way, at least for me. And I hope that that has any positive impact on anyone. That's all I'm ever looking for. So thank you again for being here. Today we're going to talk about weight control and body consumption is kind of what I put the terms here, because again, it's not necessarily about the number all the time, and it's not necessarily about always a specific aesthetic. I think there's, for me, much more health-oriented goals, goals that allow you to be a healthy older individual, a healthy younger person, feel good, do the things you want to do with your body, and also avoid disease, right? That's one of my big kind of pushes here, especially, is don't wait for a disease to strike, but try to avoid disease. So how do we do that? Through a number that's easy to attain, and some other measures that are really, again, you don't need a doctor to do. You need maybe tape measures and scale. So we'll talk just all about kind of weight and body and how this ties into health. I always have a little disclaimer here that, again, this is just for general information purposes. I realize that some people here may or may not be patients of mine. This is not kind of the point that this is just not, again, a doctor-patient relationship that's formed through this information specifically, and that I also have no conflicts of interest with any kind of products or other vendors we talk about here. Basically, I have a practice aside from this, and again, I just talk about things here more generally. So, okay, so what are some of the objectives today? Basically, we're going to talk about what influences weight. Sorry, there's plumbing work going on today, so for the people here that are live, hopefully there's not as much distraction online. So we're going to talk about what influences weight, what are basically the biological drives that input into weight and body consumption. Why is it so hard maybe to, in the modern world, to maintain a pretty healthy body consumption and to control our weight sometimes. The health consequences of this, right? So this is one of the most important things from my perspective as a doctor especially, but just as a human being as well, is just being healthy and feeling good and being well and avoiding disease. I think that's really important to me, especially as a primary care doctor. So I'll try to give some other motivations for that as well. I think tying that into who you are, your identity, something that you know, really, again, I guess care about is the kind of plainest way I could say it. Again, these are lifestyle practices, and I put lifelong kind of on there too, because I think that that has to be coupled together. These can't be things that you just do for a month or 2 or 6 months or a year or 2 years or 5 years, then you'll be well for those periods of time. And then as you let go of these habits, often, again, we'll talk about how the world is maybe not really set up to help us in this regard. So we really have to, again, practice some things ourselves to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. Take ownership of our health, right, is sort of another point I'll make there. And then, of course, as a doctor, I will touch a little bit on medications as well as other interventions here that are, let's say, more in that true, quote, medical field, okay? Again, if anyone has questions live, that is really the intention of having these lives, so please do speak up. Okay, so we'll dive right into body weight here. So what controls body weight? There's several factors that we can control and several factors that we can't control. So things like age, this is pretty obvious when you're a child and you're growing and you go through puberty. And again, those curves look much sharper, let's say, early in our lives, right? So that's kind of that obvious thing there. But also, more than body weight, I said this is also about body composition. I would say as we age, let's say from post-puberty, maybe our mid-20s on, basically what happens more than our maybe weight is supposed to change, in that way and so rapidly until maybe that age, then we see that actually, no, our body composition is maybe what changes more with age over a long period of time. And so that's something we want to take into account. There's sort of a peak age of muscularity, usually around kind of those early 20s, or sorry, mid to late 20s to early 30s. And then we want to account for what's called anabolic resistance, right? Sort of the difficulty of building muscle as we age, right? As sort of a biological feature of aging. And so that's one thing that we want to account for with age. Again, these are sort of essential truths of how we're going to age. It's not one of the themes I think that we have to, I'll just address right here from the top of the talk, is acceptance, right? Acceptance of some of these truths. If you can't believe some of the things that I'm saying, then I think that you may find it very difficult to really lose weight or control your body composition of these things. I really believe in what I'm saying here to be really science-based, and I will make clear at least what I think is much more conjecture or opinion. But again, with age, that these are just, and everybody falls on, so to make that a little more clear, right, everybody falls on some part of the spectrum, but when we look at an average, these things are true, right? So that doesn't mean that every 30-year-old has a less than body composition, let's say more muscle, or and less fat and all that, those kinds of things, than every 70-year-old. It just means on average, if you take all 30-year-olds, they're going to have better than, let's say, 70-year-olds, kind of more muscle on average, higher bone density, less body fat, etc. But that does not mean that each individual cannot differ in this way, right? There are people who are on the extremes that still, again, that's how you make sense of, well, there's one 90-year-old I know that's huge and muscular and whatever. And, of course there is, okay? And there's also, again, 30-year-olds who die of heart attacks and other kinds of bad stuff. But on average, again, these things don't happen in that way. So as long as you're not in the extremes, again, a lot of what I'm saying is very, again, just how things are. And we just want to account for that. I think that's a huge mindset that allows you to actually put some of the things that we're going to talk about into practice. Does it make sense what I'm saying there a little bit there? Okay. So height, again, if you're taller, you have bigger bones, you're going to have bigger muscles, you have bigger organs. So again, this changes just plain weight, right? So you're supposed to weigh more if you're 6'10" than if you're 5 foot. And again, those are extreme examples, but of course, that makes some intuitive sense. Male, female, again, I realize that gender sometimes now has got some flexibility and other things can happen here with hormone treatments. But again, whatever your hormone profile and kind of phenotype is, really is what determines this more. Right, so if you're a really strong male phenotype, then yes, you're going to basically have a much higher testosterone to estrogen ratio and put on a lot more muscle a lot easier, even if you're kind of just sleeping. So that makes a big difference. And then things like menopause in a female, right, when that estrogen kind of falls off a cliff, also affects certain things, especially like bone density. As they age, then we see that, again, those bones may thin. And again, there are some things we'll talk about we can do either medically or non-medically to offset some of that. Genetics here, again, this is some of the stuff you can't control. right? So who were your parents? And again, the genetics of say obesity in general, but just body weight and body composition is very complex. It doesn't really follow completely what we call Mendelian kind of dominant, X, Y, Y, X kind of, combo things. So it's, again, multifactorial, we say, meaning that many genes contribute to this, and then environment always changes the expression of genes. So we don't want genetics to sort of be the end all be all of even what we're genetically set to do. There are really not that many kind of things that are completely determined by genes, right? There's a lot of environmental exposure and again, the way you live that allows genes to be expressed more or less or in different ways. So just remember that genetics isn't everything, but of course this plays a big role. Are you really going to be an extremely skinny, tall person, that can tolerate very high calories and really never gain weight? Versus people that can only eat very few calories. And again, this is where acceptance has to be a really big theme, right? That if that is the way you are, then you have to account for that and act accordingly. So set point.
My girlfriend said they were like efficient eaters and inefficient eaters.
Well, yeah, and I don't know even if it's eaters, right? But it's maybe like metabolizers or and then there's something like, when we get down to movement, there's something called NEAT, which is non-exercised activity thermogenesis. And basically it's fidgeting, okay? So it's a scientific term for fidgeting, right? And this seems to be like some sort of real mechanism that people use to control weight. And there's just some weird, like conscious kind of thing where people will sort of do some sort of thing, wiggle a foot, do this, right? And they've done these studies, at least one with the soleus push-up, which is just kind of like a light kind of push-up with your leg like that. If you guys saw what I was doing with my legs. And so that is, again, shown to totally change some markers of glucose metabolism and some other kind of things. And so again, there's these weird things that are connected that we don't fully, let's say, think about in our conscious day to day. But yeah, so I don't know if eating, I would say, is completely.
She is joking.
Yeah, no, yeah. But something along those lines, basically, yes. Inefficient or efficient. Let's say not like even unconscious behavior, right? A lot of this is stuff that we don't necessarily do or not do because we're wanting to or not wanting to. So that gets to the set point kind of idea, right? That when researchers have looked at, let's say, what are the kind of scientific clues to what drives obesity, let's say specifically, we'll talk about, since that's an extreme of a body composition, then we have these fat set points basically in our hypothalamus. So these are again, unconscious parts of our brain generally thought of, and give these signals basically that drive hunger and satisfaction and other kind of eating behavior of that nature to basically eat more and to be at a set point, basically, is what the theories are. And what everything shows is that, again, our body really wants to be at a certain weight. And so that's why sometimes people find it very hard, right? If they do something for a while, they're very restrictive and they sort of yo-yo. This yo-yo effect that many people have experienced is thought to be due to this sort of set point in the hypothalamus. And there are some theories around, can we move this set point around? And, we'll get to this in that moment. But yeah, so basically with the set point, what I can say maybe personally is that, so there's some stuff in like 4 Hour Body, Tim Ferriss's book about this, and 4 Hour Body. And I have some references on the last slide. But there are some theories around how to reset this. My personal journey I've shared with many of you, was influenced by that book, is why I mention it. And so I use that slow carb diet in the book, and again, he has some other things about how to reset that set point, about basically plugging your nose and drinking oil or fats, basically. But essentially, if you disconnect, there's these ways that the brain has connections with calories and nutrient sensing, and this is well known now. There's really good science about the gut is very laden with a bunch of neuronal type cells that really signal back to the brain about nutrient sensing, right, rather than just calorie. And so it's a much more complex system than I think people really gave it credit for at first, or people will say us scientists, doctors, right? So there are some ways to kind of modulate this if you take in calories without really getting the taste and smell and all the other kind of brain signals with this, that it may reset certain set points and other theories like that. But so that's what they talk about in 4-Hour Body. But again, it's known that there is definitely this set point, that people experience this in different ways, and that this does seem set to some degree, but then also over times, I think modifiable. And I would say I've sort of experienced that in my own life, just going from 210 or so pounds to maybe living at more like 170-ish, okay, when I'm doing well. So, yeah, but so calorie intake, I think that one's pretty obvious. Okay, I don't know that anyone can debate. Go ahead, Mark.
I don't know if it's related to set point, but just for so much of my life, I would eat but not waste my time. I'd have to read or have to listen to a podcast or just do something else. And I don't know that it was an old Gestalt therapy book, just sit and do nothing but eat. And then the craving part was, the guy said, you can eat anything you want, just taste what you're
right
eating. And that's been,
and so I would say that's in the what I would call in the general bucket of mindfulness, which we definitely talk about here. So but yeah, sort of sitting with your craving, again, these themes of acceptance and sort of letting go of the fact that your hunger means you have to eat. It's, again, it's a feeling. We have all kinds of feelings throughout the day, and how does that influence our behavior? I think, again, that's the theme I talk about a lot and does definitely tie into eating and weight and body composition, just because we'll, again, talk a little bit about how this is tied into all these different emotional and reward centers of the brain, right? And there's some really good explanations for why that's our experience, right? So we'll definitely get into that. Calorie intake, again, just I don't know, I think I have to say too much here. But again, so kind of teasing these things apart a little bit, right? Understanding that calories are different than nutrition. Okay, so this is a theme of like what we're going to do about this, that the body needs nutrition, not just calories. And that calories nowadays have become way too easy to come by, right? And this is why we've seen, let's say, quote unquote, obesity rates really rise throughout the years. That's what the data really suggests, right? Is that, again, obesity is just kind of skyrocketing. So, that's, again, due to maybe calorie with a lack of, let's say, specifically nutrition, also micronutrition, vitamins, nutrients. So does everybody, well, I'll just break it down a little bit. Let's say macronutrients determine calories. Macronutrients have basically 3 or 4 categories. So the fourth optional, so just protein, fat, carbohydrate. Okay, so these are referring to specific kind of chemical properties of these foods and how they relate to energy production in the body. So a protein is an essential, basically, part of our diet. There are 8 amino acids we cannot make that we have to get from our diet. Those are called, again, amino acids. Those are the building blocks of proteins. We're not going to go all the way into the weeds of this, but these are just, again, chemical properties of the food and how they're turned into energy or something else in our body. So We have protein. That's what most of our body, let's say all the chemical enzymes and sort of processes of our body, a lot of our cells, the parts of our cells, structural things in our body are really made with protein. So then we have fats. Fats are, again, another essential part of our diet. Basically meaning, what does that say?
People join.
Yeah. Hello, Anna. So, no, so basically, again, fats are going to be another essential part of our diet. There are certain fats that our body cannot generate so specifically like omega-3 fatty acids. And again, these things, if we are not getting from the environment around us, basically eating, then we are not going to survive, essentially. You will die. You can eat lots of other calories and not get this in the right proportion, and you will perish, right? So actually, of the three, I remind people, and this is not saying you should never eat a carbohydrate, it's just of the three macronutrients, carbohydrates are the only ones you never need to consume, right, to actually stay alive. So the body has the way to generate, again, glucose, right, out of all of these other precursors and can maintain a healthy blood sugar and give your body all kinds of other fuels, right, that are non-essential, basically are carbohydrates. Carbohydrates also act as a fuel and can be beneficial in all kinds of, let's say, situations, especially, let's say, great feats of kind of physical demanding feats, right? So when we're extremely exerting and we're running a marathon or powerlifting or doing these extreme feats of human exertion, or just like whatever your maximal kind of feats are for even your body, then the body's really then consuming glucose in a much more different way, right? This is what we know about metabolism. So actually at rest, a healthy metabolism should be burning fat. That is what the goal is that when you're sleeping, when you're not eating in between meals relatively quickly, that your body sort of switch back into mostly fat burning mode. That's what I would say nowadays is really defined as sort of a healthy metabolism. Okay, so basal metabolic rate, again, this is sort of what you're burning when you're asleep. And then lastly, movement. So how much you move, right? We talked about this as exercise. That one's the obvious one, but I'd already sort of jumped ahead to the non-exercise movement.
So how much is the basal metabolic rate controlled by genetics versus how active?
I think, again, this is very hard to exactly determine. I think you can figure this out by self-experimentation, but it would be hard for me to look at you and to tell you this number. So there are some calculators to give you a ballpark. So you can go online and just type in, BMR, basal metabolic rate calculator. You put in some demographics, things like age, height, gender, weight, and spits out a number. And I think maybe a general activity level, things like that. So, and it spits out a number. That number, I would say, could easily be, let's say, 300 to 500 calories off, depending on those other factors, right? So that's kind of the difficulty, but that does give you a ballpark. It's not going to be, let's say, 1,000 calories off. So, I think, again, it could give you a ballpark to shoot for. And then if you shoot for that and you see you're gaining weight every day, well, now you, again, or especially week to week, you have evidence, right, that is too high or low or whatever, right? So depending on if you're gaining, then of course it was too high. And if you're losing weight, then yeah, maybe that's too low. And again, it gets a little more complicated, and we'll talk about sort of, what you're eating that does make a difference, the macronutrient content. To finish out that kind of macro-micro split here, I would just say that after carbohydrates, the fourth one is potentially alcohol. This has some special biological, or let's say metabolic kind of pathways. So alcohol is a bit different. And then micronutrients are basically your vitamins and minerals, right? And these are sort of essential building blocks for your cells, for again, all the vital things, how do you convert, let's say, glucose into ATP, which is the biological kind of currency for energy. It's what's needed for every muscle contraction, et cetera, right? It has to go through this part of the cell called the mitochondria. And that really needs, let's say, a lot of the B vitamins. Why did people say B vitamins are part of energy? Right, it's because they're actually helping these chemical reactions in that part of the cell, right? So that's what B vitamins do, and some, iron, for example, is a very important part of oxygen carrying in red blood cells. So that's how micronutrients play a role. So this ties right into this theme of like biological drives, right? What is driving us to be hungry, satisfied, right? And I would say that food also is tying into pleasure, right? So let's dive into hunger a little bit, and that's why I really wanted to break down the micro and macronutrients. The brain and the gut are definitely connected, right? People talk about this gut-brain connection. Yes, they're connected, of course. The brain controls everything in your body and has inputs and outputs really from almost every single little square millimeter of your body, really. Unless there's nerve damage, I guess, really is the only exception. And so this in the gut and interacts with our behavior in the way of something we call hunger, right? And hunger is very multifactorial. This is not just about calories, right? This has to do with, is the stomach stretched or is the stomach sort of flattened down, right? So what we call gastric distension, right? So foods that are maybe low in calories but really stretch that stomach out can actually solve a hunger problem, let's say, right? And if you're smart, let's say something like celery or raw vegetables, for example, are really good at doing things like this. High fibrous foods really do this well, where there's a lot of water and fiber in these foods and very low calories that are going to get that hunger and satisfaction going in ways that maybe promote health rather than really deprive us of that. And so the other thing here is that, we see that there are certain foods that really usurp these kind of brain pathways, right, and drive this phenomenon of hunger, right? So foods that really spike that blood sugar, absorb really quickly, and then we come down on these energy crashes. So again, potato chips and really ice cream, pizza, kind of high grain, high sugar, high combo sugar fat foods, right? We see actually go right into this dopamine reward system and fire into the brain, literally like a drug, right? Like sort of what we call in society drugs of abuse, right? So neurochemically, we could argue that there's so much in common with things like, let's say, even cocaine, methamphetamine, and then things like sugar and fat combo in the brain. So again, we have chosen to call one a drug of abuse and one food and normal. And let's bring it to our friend's house, right? So again, that's just how we're sort of set up. And one of the things I'm trying to sort of say here in this talk is that this is, the food culture of our world, especially kind of the Western world, and I would say America in some ways uniquely, right, has really become one of sort of food addiction and creating food products that allow you to buy more food, right? And that makes a lot of sense. These food companies are trying to make more money, and that's okay. I mean, that's the system we have, and we have to deal with that and sort of make our decisions really talk back to the market, I guess. I don't know. That's the choice we have, I think. So I don't know what else we can do really realistically right now as individuals. So that's sort of my pitch to everybody, right, with some of this is the food market is not looking to take care of you, right? The food market is looking to sell you more food. Okay, and that may be in direct opposition to your health, right? So let's just take that to really at least maybe be partially true. I think those incentives at least are realistic and there. Go ahead.
So you're saying a craving is a symptom of addiction?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the scientific definition, I would say, in the DSM. Craving is one of the let's say symptoms, right, or definitions, right? If you have cravings, that's a component of the syndrome of addiction. Okay, so yes, absolutely. Craving, withdrawal, sort of behaving in a way, knowing despite this is sort of has consequences for you or sort of people around you, right? These are some of the sort of general definitions of addiction that are, again, these are the medical psychiatric definitions. Okay. So again, and this is not again, this is not condemning anybody, right? I mean, I think I really am passionate, let's say, about treating these in a sort of the more even traditional senses, and I've shared with many people around me and many people that know me well that, you know, these types of behaviors are something that I personally battled with too, in my own ways. And so again, this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and sort of me search, right? People would call our anecdata. So I have some of that too here in this field. So I would say, again, that's why I sort of really like to talk about this and get a little bit passionate about this and really make that a point, because this is something that I think maybe we all battle with in some big ways and small ways, right? So and what can we do, right? That's, again, I think one of my, hopefully, I give some ideas here, but I think having the background is an important part of, let's say, the motivation. And that's why I'm spending some time here on the background and sort of the physiology, neuroscience. I also think that this takes some of that shame and blame out of this, right? That this is the way our brains are built. Okay, we're human beings. Who can blame us for being human beings and having a brain, right? So if this is the way your brain is, you know, but then the cool thing about, I think, being a human being, right, is using that frontal lobe and the ability to say, like, okay, these are some of my more natural impulses, but I actually get to maybe choose to follow those or not. Right, I think that's one of the most, I have said this a lot too, and at least in an exam room, right, is I really believe that to be one of the most human features, right? And maybe some other really complex mammals can do some stuff like this, but I think humans do this in a very unique and very social way, right, where we can tie to others, express this in a unique way, pass that through generations even, potentially. And so anyway, just tying that back to you know, how we eat and how we, you know, tie our kind of selves and identities to food, right, is a big theme of what I'll talk about, what we can do. Yeah.
But I mean, evolutionarily, having fat or sugar, finding that was like, oh, we can survive. We've got this high.
Exactly. So this is like perfect right into fat storage here, right? So that's exactly what I mean here, right? Is that evolutionarily, we definitely want to store fat. That's what we would want to do, right? As a being, it was very hard in nature, let's say even 1,000 years ago, to find food. Right, this was a major problem. So if you look at if I put up a chart, maybe I should have, again, put up a chart, let's say 1,000 years ago, what was the top 3 causes of death? Right, do we have some guesses maybe from the crowd? Disease, infectious disease, definitely. Hunger, famine, right? So yes, absolutely. Malnutrition, hunger, famine, right? Actually, I can forget number 3, but actually I think it's homicide. So it's, yeah, you know, killing, wars, right? So so now, right, those 3 are actually probably not the bottom 3, but let's say near the bottom 3. Okay, causes of death. They've gone from the top 3 to in the single-digit percentiles of death. You know, 1.1 kinds of percentile. You know, whereas cardiovascular disease, a disease that I would say most, at least who I consider smart scientists and physicians, really believe this to be completely preventable, right? In most people, let's say if you don't have FH, familial hypercholesterolemia, a few other kinds of conditions, right, that are very genetic. And again, I would say detectable, and treatable, actually, some of them. And so outside of those conditions, right, we believe that the number 1 cause of death, 33+% of people that will, again, die this year, next year, probably next year after that, is preventable. right? So, and number two, cancer, right? There's a lot of talk about how that may be largely preventable. Although, again, I would have to say as a disease category, cancer is maybe one of the least preventable ones of the top three we talk about, right? As sort of, and then number three maybe being dementia and related causes. And again, cardiovascular would talk about strokes and everything goes in that category too. So it's just all sorts of vascular disease that sort of have a root origin, right, of atherosclerosis and inflammation. But anyway, going back to fat storage, yes, we are driven as beings. I made that whole point to say that famine was definitely the #1 cause of death, or near the #1 cause of death, for the vast majority of the Homo sapien experience. And so our genes very much are tailored to avoid this starvation, which means we are actually really good at storing fat, sometimes from very few calories, right? Which is, again, a big, big problem when you drive down the street and there's flashing signs of, again, Domino's, McDonald's, this, Starbucks, that, okay, whatever, and this new restaurant, that new restaurant, et cetera, et cetera. And I, again, love food, and I don't think that none of these things should exist. I'm just saying, how are we making these decisions? How are we seeing these things as a part of our lives and our environment? Insulin sensitivity, right? So why do we get insulin resistant? Right, so why would our body be made in a way where if you just eat carbs, you get this terrible disease, diabetes, that rots your eyes and feet and kidneys and just kills you over a long period of time? But still, that's essentially what it does. And just from eating, again, some grains, this, again, doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Except that if we go back to what I just said about fat storage, right, the best theory that I've heard around insulin sensitivity and resistance, right, is that when we get into these kind of high carb moments that would have been maybe, oh, we're starving, we find honey, we find some sort of other sort of big reward in the environment, right? So this is, again, tied to that dopamine reward system. We're going to store this for times of famine, right? Carbs, fruit, honey, these other things come during what period of time? Spring and summer, right? And then what's coming after that is fall and winter, right? When these things don't exist, right, anymore in our environment, right? So we want to have stored that as fat, right? Is sort of one of the big theories, is that our body's made in this way that when we can overconsume this stuff, that means, okay, we're in a time of bounty, let's really store this up for that famine that we know is coming, right? So in a way, again, this is tied into survival in a time that doesn't exist anymore. So we, again, have to take some ownership back of that. Nutrient sensing, I think I've hit on this pretty well, right? That the body is looking for much more than just calories. It wants different amino acids. It wants different fatty acids. It wants different micronutrients, iron, B vitamins, again, folate, all that, which is a B vitamin, but again, all sorts of different vitamins, A, D, K, again, all the different letters. So many other little minerals, magnesium, selenium, etc., right, that we need to survive. So, and we do seem to have ways to really detect this. And I think one of the theories I have is that really that perhaps we're hungry sometimes when we're overly hungry, let's say when we're eating some of these quote unquote empty calories because they lack the right combination of these other things, right? Our bodies are tuned to try to eat things that exist in nature, right? And so carrot was built in a very similar way. We think of ourselves so different from plants, but we actually share a lot of biology with them. And they need a lot of things we need to survive, right? So then when we eat that plant or we eat an animal that hasn't been ultra processed, right, or whatever, marine, all these things that come from nature, they were built on the same codes that built us, right? So it makes some sense that they're going to have some things that we need. I think, again, that's sort of the way I've come to see some of this. So that's how I would say nutrient sensing ties into what some of the practical things we're going to talk about. I think I've really hit that dopamine reward system. Again, especially sugar and fat seems to really hit these buttons hard, right? And that makes a lot of sense. I think if you think about at least my personal experience, I would say foods that are hard to control your eating, or maybe that really drive hunger and craving, have this kind of combo usually, where they're pretty high in sugar and fat, or let's say starch and fat. Again, it's carbohydrates and fats, okay, as far as the two macros. Leptin and ghrelin, I kind of just put this on there just because, again, they are some important hormones of hunger and satisfaction, leptin being satisfaction, ghrelin being hunger. And there are some ways to modulate this as we get to maybe some medications. But this is not completely the whole picture, is really what the research shows, right? That there are some major themes in kind of the research of obesity around these two hormones, but that a lot of the interventions that have been tried in this field just haven't been really as expected, let's say. So this hasn't been the most fruitful kind of place for, let's say, modulation, definitely. So why talk about this? I think, again, this maybe obvious, maybe not, but I'll just kind of give my major points here. So metabolic, right? So this is maybe one of the most important from how it ties into the rest of your health. How does the way you eat and what your body composition is tie into cardiovascular disease, dementia, cancer, autoimmune disease, again, et cetera, allergies maybe, again, so many different things that, and that's partly through metabolism, let's say. So the way you break down food and the types of foods you're eating create lots of signals in your body. And so those signals, right, have to be interpreted either as sort of safety or danger. Again, the foods you eat may or may not create a certain amount of sort of inflammatory load, right? And that can be within a realm of normal, or it can be really kind of a pressure to your body, right? So as every time you're eating sort of an insult to your body that your body now has to deal with, sort of. Or is it a little bit more nourishing, where you're allowing your body to make energy in really efficient ways and giving, let's say, the gut microbiome, the building blocks it needs to sustain your health. That's one thing maybe I didn't talk too much about yet, but again, I would say yes, a very important part of maybe our weight control and metabolism, it seems to also be these gut bacteria, right, and viruses and other kind of all sorts of fungi that, there's all sorts of things that live in our, specifically our gut, but within this talk, but let's say all over our skin, eyes, nose, ears, groin, again, just all sorts of different environments there that it's natural to have and impossible not to have some sort of microbial environment. And those things can promote health as it pertains to weight and specifically in the gut, right? Or sometimes it can be a detriment to health. And we're still really learning a lot about that and how that ties into some of these health effects. But let's say that, again, we definitely see that certain environments are associated with really healthy kind of individuals, and certain environments we see are definitely associated with certain sick kind of conditions. So we know that those strong associations are there, but we don't always know how to kind of get one to the other. Movement, orthopedic, right? This is a pretty common one. I would say the statistics around this are that 70% of individuals will present to their primary care doctor with just low back pain. Then if you add knee, hip, foot, shoulder, neck, etc., I would say maybe that goes to 100%. I don't know, or close to a 95, 99. I don't know if that's data is out there. But again, movement, not that, again, all of that's weight related or body composition related or even avoidable. Some of that's injuries because you're just living your life. But let's say that some of it certainly is due to things that are under our control. And just acknowledging that yes, our joints are made to withstand certain types of forces, and if we're asking too much of those joints, then sometimes damage starts to occur. I personally don't love this kind of theme that osteoarthritis is just bound to happen no matter what, right? Bones really do remodel because they have forces that they see as, again, I realize I'm sort of personifying, but you know, again, if you pull on a bone chronically in a way with a tendon, then what happens is you get a bone spur. Right, and then people blame the bone spur, let's say in plantar fasciitis, for example, for the pain. But the problem that probably caused that bone spur is tightness of the tendon of the plantar fascia pulling on that bone that caused that bone to grow that way. Right, so sometimes we blame the result because that's what we can see, but we don't necessarily always account for the cause of it. And I think there is a little bit of that. And again, it's not to say that resolving the spur might not help you. It's just to say that if you only resolve the spur, will it not recur if the sort of environment in which it formed hasn't changed at all, right? And I think that's another question sometimes that doesn't always get asked. And so with movement and orthopedic health and body weight, right, if we're asking our body to take repetitive forces of walking even, right, where we're doing, quote, again, literally a single leg squat every time we're walking, which means that about, I want to say that the math is about 4 times your body weight force, right, is going through each leg and foot. So that's how that math kind of works out force-wise with gravity. And so again, we're asking that of our body just walking. And then we want to, again, say that, well, this arthritis just happens. I think that sometimes there's more we can do. We can strengthen that musculature. Doesn't always, and this is where body composition really comes in, right? Why do we need strong, robust muscles, right? Because that is what is taking those forces out of those bones and keeping those bones from growing those bone spurs and having that arthritis. Right? You have to allow those muscles to be strong enough, robust enough to handle the forces that you're putting through it. So that's how, again, I think that how this causes pain, right, and arthritis and other things of that nature is that sometimes it's that not just our weight might be too high, right, but maybe that our muscles still cannot compensate for whatever that weight may be. Right, and again, that's why body composition, muscularity is a big theme here of what we're going to do. Longevity and health span. Yeah. Yeah. So there's more close associations with health span and longevity, basically, than things like insulin resistance and other factors like this are less associated with all-cause mortality than, let's say, like VO2 max or like grip strength. Right, meaning that some of your physical fitness markers, right, of metabolism and sort of physical strength may be more telling of your overall health than even some factors that we as doctors really think are super important. And so again, this ties in a little bit to what you eat, of course, but I think that specific data also ties into just more what we're going to do about this, right? But having the right building blocks here, right? So if you're not supporting, let's say, good movement protocols with the right nutrition, then again, you're not going to get those results. So you have to be fueling that kind of work, right, with the right nutrients, micronutrients, macronutrients. So just again, thinking about that is one of the best ways to really increase health, right, is to combine these measures, give your body the right building blocks so that you can be that healthy, 90-year-old, 100-year-old. Really, that's the goal, I think, here at this clinic. So mental and psychiatric. This is really, there's a brand new field kind of metabolic psychiatry where we're seeing that, yes, absolutely, metabolism and what you eat seems to really be tied into psychiatric conditions even. ADHD, autism, well, maybe not autism, sorry, yeah, let's say ADHD, anxiety, again, just depression, etc. So you can, if you don't flush, I think you'll be fine. If yeah, yeah.
Yourself right at home.
But so then really there's ways. So and let's say even like neurologic conditions. So we know that one of the first developments of the ketogenic diet in a medical fashion was to treat seizures, right, in children. So we actually, again, that was, I believe, in the 30s or 40s that was developed. So we know that there are these not necessarily psychiatric, but so even neurogenic diseases, right, that are treatable by metabolism, right, and what we're putting into our bodies is fuel. So we know that, again, there's really strong health effects of what we're putting in, which, again, just makes perfect sense if you break down, as I hope I have, how these things are allowing our body to do all the things that we do. Hormonal. So this is where, again, protein is tied to, let's say, testosterone. You have to eat a little bit of fat and cholesterol, right, to make these different hormones, vitamin D, etc., which acts a little bit as a hormone as well as nutrient. There are all sorts of different examples here of how foods also can affect hormones in positive and negative ways. There's this kind of phytoestrogen phenomenon that's out there, which generally for eating soy, you're really not going to activate those receptors that strongly. You have to eat an immense amount of soy to really get into a problem there. So I'd give people a lot of reassurance around eating soy products. Although, there is a sort of theme around maybe lavender sort of really acting as estrogen kind of receptor binder and maybe being a problem, especially in children, right? So who are very much more sensitive to these hormonal signals. So again, these are how, again, I guess we're not eating lavender a lot, but let's just say different environmental exposures can really affect hormone levels. And then kind of societal and cultural, right? So I will say that as a Bangladeshi person or sort of dual cultural Bangladeshi American, talking about the person's body is a very common thing in a social environment, which in some societies is not necessarily as open, but again, it's like if you gain and lose weight, people are always like, oh, you look so much fatter or skinnier, you look so whatever. And sometimes it's more tactful or less. But so there are lots of other cultures that really were, openly talking about the body is a really big deal. Then I would say in all cultures, though, there's at least, I would say, some element of overt or covert or signals about what you should look like, what you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating, and I found that over a lot of, recent history that a lot of that is definitely non-scientific and that really doesn't tie to, let's say, important health markers like, insulin, triglycerides, your waist circumference, your body composition of how much percent muscle and fat and visceral fat, other factors like this, right, that really tie into health much more strongly with a lot of really good research, right? We're not necessarily talking about those things. Again, I think a lot of those motivations might tie back to the capitalist nature of these markets, right? And that they are not necessarily meant to look for that, right? They're trying to maximize shareholder profit. So again, lots of ways that society and cultures sort of can influence this stuff and give us different messages about what we should and shouldn't be doing. And it's not to say that all of those things are necessarily wrong either. There are some parts of that may function over populations to benefit, and it's not always harmful. Again, I'm not trying to discourage or, again, that's not my intention, just to talk about, let's account for that this is a real thing that we're all exposed to in some ways. Okay. So what are we going to do about some of this stuff? So I think, again, I've probably tied nutritional principles into this talk already really strongly. This is what I was talking about, let's say, with just understanding macro and micronutrients, and then calories, right, is almost a separate category, right, as energy. Let's sort of separate a little bit things like energy and nutrition, right? And we need both, okay? And we need lots of nutrition, okay, and lots of different things in that nutrition category that we really can't get too much of, okay? But in the energy category, really we can get way too much, and sometimes really easily, right? And sometimes, unfortunately, it's a combo of that way too much easily without the nutritional component. Right, and this would be maybe like potato chips might be a really good example here, where really they don't have. I mean, yes, potatoes have potassium, and you get some sodium, and you do get lots of energy from potato chips. They have maybe not no nutrition, but let's say it's a very limited kind of scope of all of the different kinds of things that we need, and definitely, let's say, in proportions that are not going to promote health. Does that mean we could never have something like that? Absolutely not. It just means that this is a high kind of risk food, or it's one, let's say, that's not promoting that some of the categories that we know we need for health, right? So this is what I kind of mean by nutritional principles. I think people get way too bogged down into named diet. I have to be vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, carnivore, this, that. Yes.
I was just wondering, using potato chips as an example, a person can use an alternative instead of potato chips. You could use something else that might be better.
Yeah, so I would say some alternatives would be like, cheese chips, right? That are, or they make these flaxseed crackers. If you're more like on the vegan, lactose free side. There are some, let's say, cassava flour, another cauliflower vegetable, kind of chickpea kind of products. Again, none of these are necessarily, I would say, foods that you would want to consume a ton of anyway, because they're still, processed foods in some ways. But there are definitely some choices you can make that, especially in today's market, where I do think that this kind of information has made a difference on the market. And we do have some choices that are healthier for us. And again, people say that they're more expensive, and they are. And they're harder to find, and they are. And but again, to me, it's how much would 10 or 20 years of diabetes cost on the back end of your life, or a stroke or a heart attack, right? That you survive, and then sort of are debilitated from, And so I don't, it's and sure, maybe we have a insurance program or something to pay for some of that, but is that really the life you want for your loved one or yourself? I mean, I don't know. It's not my, I would say no for me. And I would say everything I do is to try to really prevent some of that. So, yeah, but any other questions about?
No, that's
Yeah.
kind of
Definitely, I would say, this, I can't go into all the different kinds of swaps, but, at least for our people here, we do have, again, that's what I would say, like our health coach really is supposed to help people with some of those specific kinds of things. I do have some resources as well on my website. Again, we'll have some other, I did a little group visit that was about like shopping lists and things like that, and we'll try to do some more things like that with practical kind of tools and sort of showing specific kind of alternatives. So again, that's hopefully to come soon. So movement, any other questions about nutrition or sort of general principles here? Again, to wrap up what I was saying earlier, it's fine for you to follow one of these named diets, but please account for these other things, right? I mean, there are some things that if you're vegan, right, B12 gets low, and that's fine. Like I think there's some good, maybe socioeconomic, other kinds of reasons to follow certain types of eating patterns. There are some health food allergen kind of reasons. Again, lots of different reasons to really do these to promote your own health. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying, account for the full array of what's needed here and just compensate if you follow a very, more restrictive kind of pattern, then you have to account for, does it include all the things I need? So yeah, so movement tools. This is, again, just exercise snacks here. This is kind of one practical tool, right? So doing potentially, 30 seconds of squats, jumping jacks, running up and down stairs, running in place, whatever you can do, just big arm circles, calf raises. Doing these for as little as 30 seconds to a minute, 3 times a day, let's say throughout your workday, is sort of what the study showed, has, measurable positive health effects. So it's really shown, and there's other data to really show that, again, sitting for more than 5 hours a day can erase, let's say, upwards of maybe up to an hour of exercise, moderate exercise, right? So making sure that we're not just sitting all day long and we're getting up, moving around. This data around 7,000 to 10,000 steps, right? If you did it all in one block, right, they didn't really see as much benefit as when that was spread out through the day, right? That you took whatever, the same amount of steps, but it was through 8 to 10 hours a day, right? And that's why after I make you sit here for an hour and a half and listen to me, we're going to go walk on the Riverwalk, okay? And so again, just trying to build this into your life, right? Not giving yourself an excuse. Could I find other care for my dog other than here at the office? Probably, right? That he forces me to take him on a walk in the afternoon. And so that's part of that, sort of trapping me in that too. So again, just trying to build this into your life in ways and trying to, make sure you have a desk that has an easy standing kind of feature, or again, that you arrange your office and your life in this way that you're just moving a little bit more. And then of course, having some sort of fitness exercise program, I think, is extremely important, especially let's say on the body composition side, right? The only way to really increase your metabolism, how do you increase what you're going to burn when you sleep? Basically the slam dunk way is build more muscle, right? And build strength. Both, either or, will increase your metabolism. You're going to have more mitochondria in those cells, right? They're going to have more mitochondrial density. They're going to have newer mitochondria. They're going to have more muscle cells, which have newer and more mitochondria, right? So that is the only way that you're going to then be able to tolerate more calories, tolerate a little bit more without having all this inflammatory responses shift into everything to fat and go insulin resistant, right? That's the only way to do it, basically, without medicine, is to really change that body composition and increase that muscularity, increase that strength, right? And that's, again, has so many downstream effects that are so important. We're finding out the muscles give off all these kinds of hormones, right, that signal back to all of our organs, to our brain, right, to actually then calm down inflammation. Because muscles, when you exercise, is a highly inflammatory event, right? It hurts. It feels hard, right? Because again, it's causing inflammation in your body, right? But this is how nature works, right? We stress to a point, and then we have to have that rest period. And in that rest period, that regeneration often is what causes that kind of healing, right, in the body. And we see this with muscular work, that after exercise, we have all sorts of anti-inflammatory compounds. Endorphins are some of the first ones that have been discovered, but now myokines, all sorts of different classes of compounds are being discovered that are really performing this anti-inflammatory and healing work of what we see exercise perform. Along with, let's say, sleep, right? Sleep is very much in this category of restoration, right? Even if we are, bench pressing, deadlifting, hiking, etc., right? And then we're not sleeping well, we're going to see sometimes half or, so the gains that you could make, right? So your level of fitness will not increase, even if you're doing all the nutrition and everything else, right? So sleep is so important to weight and body composition. It drives hunger pathways if we're underslept, very hard to, let's say, definitely destroys kind of prefrontal cortex area of willpower, right? So when you feel like you didn't sleep and you just want to eat chocolate and whatever else, yeah, that's because your brain doesn't literally have the ability to tell you to stop anymore because of your underslept kind of state, right? So this is not, again, we blame ourselves and we play the shame game, and that sometimes wraps us back into this behavior. If we can come to a mindset to understand that this is actually how nature works, and what we have to do is, again, just accept that and sort of throw away the candy, throw away the temptation, whatever you have to do to sort of make that behavior really happen, right? But don't allow yourself to have, if the cue is enough for you to then go forward with the behavior, then you have to remove the cue, is what I'm trying to say. Right? You have to take it all the way down. And I think part of it is people say, well, I should be able to just avoid whatever, or I'm listening to my body, I'm hungry. Well, yeah, sure, you're hungry, but what are you really hungry for? Right? Is it really that short-term high sugar burst, right, that's maybe needed if you're running a marathon? Or is it maybe a healthier building block that has maybe some more fat, fiber, protein, right, that's actually going to nourish those cells and allow these chemical reactions that actually make your energy, right, and allow you to think and move, right? So we have to have this connection back with our food. That food is a sacred kind of building block that we're putting into our body to fuel our body in a meaningful way. Right, and we can have food for pleasure. I am not going to deny that to anybody, but let's accept that that's what you're doing, right? It should be the same as if I choose to have a beer. Okay, then sure, maybe again I could have one, but if I have 10, then that really becomes a different thing, right? And I'm choosing to have that as sort of a a pleasurable kind of thing that I understand if I cross a certain line that may be pretty low, right? This starts to have some really serious health consequences. And I think we have to see some foods as sort of luxuries and pleasures in this way, treats, if we really want to have a healthy mindset around some of our modern foods. And so this, again, I've really hit into food addiction already. I'll come back up to mindfulness, right? So how do we do this? We have to think about this, right? I do think it takes this sort of higher level thinking. If we leave it to our sort of more animal instincts, I would say our environment has become toxic, and it will lead us to addiction. So we really have to have that mindfulness, sort of step back, realize that no, there is sort of this bigger me, this other self, right, that can look back on this and kind of say like, no, that's sort of my animal instinct, and I'm going to choose not to pay attention to that, or to maybe nourish my hunger in a more meaningful way, right? If we can make that connection, I think that's what I personally found to be very helpful. Cooking at home, this is just, again, huge, right? How do you do this? You have to cook at home. We're going to have some talks about cooking, about how to stock a kitchen, different recipes, things like that. So that's definitely some material to come. But, again, having a few different methods down here, buy a cookbook, buy a couple, they're very helpful. And some of them really break this down in really meaningful ways and really teach you to cook in different styles. Again, Tim Ferriss has that cookbook himself, which actually teaches you how to learn all sorts of new skills. It talks sort of about meta learning, and that's called 4-Hour Chef. Thomas Keller, who's a world-renowned chef, has won Best Restaurant of the World several times with French Laundry up in the California area. I personally read one of his cookbooks, which was very influential, another New Orleans cook, so I've read a couple different cookbooks, and really sort of just from a few, you can really learn some techniques and apply that to all sorts of different foods and ingredients. So, again, just kind of boil and roasting, right? Fat is not the enemy. We take a healthy vegetable And people want to say, well, there's too much oil in this. Like, no, if you're using a healthy oil, avocado, olive oil, things like this, roasting things at a reasonable temperature, again, you're really getting a delicious product with really good, especially if you're starting with broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, other kind of vegetables, carrots, etc. You can really get a pretty delicious product. Again, you can put in all kinds of spices on it, change the profile up, and make it change all sorts of different ways, and a much better, let's say, product than just rice or pasta or other things that are just very energetically heavy, but maybe don't have all the colors. So we're looking forward, again, colors in foods, crunchiness, leafy greens, right? Things that have those fibers that are going to feed those healthy microbiome environment. And again, it should be kind of fun, right? I mean, I think this can really be something that's interesting and fun, and can become really something that you love to do. There's a lot of data to suggest that when you believe food is healthier for you, it starts to taste better. Okay, and I just don't see any reason not to believe this stuff. I mean, it has all sorts of really not just data, but I think there's a really intuitive story here, right, of why this should be healthy for us to eat things that come from the earth. I mean, I think that just it's really hard for me to believe that that's not true. And there's just so much data that shows that's true too. So go ahead.
A lot of controversy, maybe in my mind, and cooked from ingredients. You go buy ingredients that very day, they're fresh at the store, nothing processed, versus, say, a TV dinner that has vegetable, has a bean, a corn, or peas, or carrots.
Sure.
It has a piece of meat,
Sure.
fish, chicken, a potato,
Mhm.
very little gravy, maybe. So how much different is that from?
So there's a pretty.
From getting beans out of a can.
So there's a very interesting study that was done. So everybody was sort of trapped in the NIH, and they were given basically two types of food, and there was, I think, the same patients were swapped from one group to another. I think it was 2 or 4 week study. Food was measured, again, all sorts of things to really make this, because nutritional studies are extremely hard. But it gets to the heart of what you're saying. So the group first was given processed food, like TV dinners, sort of a Salisbury steak versus maybe a real piece of steak, or again, very similarly matched things, right? But it was highly processed. And then the second time they were given very minimally processed, tried to match similar food, similar macros, nutrients profile. And on average, the processed group ate, I think, maybe 300 to 500 calories, I want to say, a day more. Okay, so it just drives a little bit more hunger and eating. Okay, is at least what this study would imply. And that, is almost about a pound a day. We're talking about 500 calories is about a pound. Okay, and so again, that's pretty impressive data to suggest that just the processing of food seems to drive some of our hunger signals, right? And it seems to be these high sodium loads and other kinds of things that are in there. We don't know exactly what the component it might be quite yet, but yes, it does seem that some highly processed food, some of the elements of it seem to, again, trigger mechanisms that just cause us to kind of eat more unconsciously, is what it seems.
So
now, that's not to say that like fresh frozen things, I would say that is still minimally processed, right? Because it doesn't have salt added, doesn't have sort of preservatives added, right? So if it's fresh frozen and you're sort of warming that in, in your own, let's say like a bag of frozen peas or mixed vegetables or something of that nature, chopped spinach, etc., right? These things are, I would really think and believe them to be probably equivalent to the fresh products in many ways.
So a can of corn is not going to be a whole lot different than a microwave corn.
Right. And you may want to rinse, right? So a lot of those canned vegetables, you can really get away with taking some of the salted water and stuff that's in. If you rinse your vegetables, so you put them in a strainer, rinse through water, right? That can resolve a lot of that added sodium effect as well. So even if you're buying some canned vegetables, say to save money and etc. So yeah. or just to have, again, more shelf life, right? These things have a reason that they were made that way. And so we can take advantage of that, again, respecting some of these other principles. Yeah. Any other questions? Liquid calories. So this is kind of a special category, right? So this looks like alcohol, but also just like all other drink calories, sodas, again, cocktails, etc. Even like protein shakes and other things like this, smoothies, which a lot of people really consider quote health food. We just have to realize that this kind of blended product that hasn't been chewed and is kind of broken down, right there, the blender and everything has done sort of the digestive work for us. So the body has less work to do to absorb this. And it just kind of triggers certain mechanisms much faster than I would say a whole food might. And so just accounting for that if you really do something that's very low carbohydrate, mostly, let's say, fat and protein, you really can get away with some liquid calories that aren't to drive, let's say, hunger specifically, but we especially see liquid carbohydrates maybe really drive these reward and hunger kind of signals, right, and really maybe drive more consumption. And then the other thing with alcohol specifically is it really has a pretty strong connection with just like, let's say, mindless eating, kind of being able to consume a lot more calories without sort of feeling it till maybe the next day. So that's, again, something with liquid calories that I would say is just we want to account for in our lifestyle practices if we're using any of these other substances or even drinking sodas or things like that, just knowing that, okay, maybe I have to ride that hunger wave for a little while, not just reach for another soda or another drink, etc., more mindless snacks. Again, that's where you can connect things like that with mindfulness. And then if you're not slept well, then that all goes down the drain. And so again, these are really integrated practices, right? If we don't do all of these things a little bit, then sometimes all of it sort of falls apart all at once too. And that's okay, right? Get back on that horse, don't miss twice kind of thing. Stealing from James Clear and Atomic Habits, right? Is sort of, basically, if you mess up, that's called being a human, right? And then you just don't, get in that guilt and shame cycle and stay in kind of that, F it kind of mode. So yeah, just again, forgive yourself, move on, go back to, the things you need to do to be better. So where's the little pointer? There it goes. Okay. Last but not least, we'll talk a little bit about medications, interventions. And again, I'll take another kind of caveat here to say that I don't necessarily see a huge difference in my mind between sometimes, let's say, as big a difference as I see sometimes in the general public around things like supplements, pharmaceuticals, other kind of chemicals we put in our body, right there. It doesn't necessarily matter what we have labeled it as. What matters is what kind of biological effects it has, is sort of my perspective. How does it change our biology, our genetic expression, our behavior, our mental, states, etc. Right? Does that have long-term negative effects, positive effects, etc.? So again, these are more important to me than what we call the substance. So let me just say that to open. But again, we will talk a little bit mostly about, let's say, kind of more prescription kind of things here. I'm not necessarily going to hit a lot on the supplement kind of category. We've talked a lot about the nutritional category. Again, there's lots of meaningful supplements that can increase your new micronutrients, proteins, etc. there. So again, as I said, I don't endorse any one particular supplement or nutritional product there. Stimulants, so these are, again, a lot more than the ones I listed, but these are the ones that have been basically approved for weight loss in some way. So phentermine basically works by increasing your metabolism, basically kind of causes the mitochondria to be a little more efficient, so you have to burn things a little bit more, sort of thing. You generate a little bit more body heat. Your heart rate goes up a little bit. So again, all of these things that kind of cause you to just burn a little bit more energy, that is definitely chemically induced. When you take that away, then generally your metabolism goes back. Or sometimes what I worry about is maybe it goes back to lower than it was before. This is sort of a related compound to, let's say, things like amphetamines, caffeines, ephedrins, other things like this, which don't necessarily have an approval for weight loss, but do have some of these other effects, let's say. Again, that it does cause most people, I've seen people lose weight on phentermine for sure. I worry a little bit about long-term consequences, and certainly it's not safe to be on for a lifetime. Can have some serious cardiac side effects and other problems there. So topiramate, this is Topamax, otherwise known as sort of a seizure medicine, anti-seizure medicine. So this, in combination with other meds as well as alone, seems to have some mild appetite suppressant kind of effect. And really that probably should be a little bit in the appetite suppressant category. So yeah, but in the stimulants, I would say there's more, the ADHD medications do this to some degree, right? Do have some appetite metabolism stimulation effect. But again, not a lot in this category that's really safe, basically. But anything that kind of upregulates that metabolism will cause you to lose a little bit of weight. Appetite suppressants, right? So the strongest ones here, and again, I said topiramate sort of in that category. The strongest ones here are going to be the GLP-1s, but these are anything that works on, basically there's a whole system of what's called incretins, which are these gut hormones or peptides. There's several out there that are under research and few others on the market. If you guys have heard of drugs like Januvia or the gliptin drugs, they work on this system a little bit too. They're just less potent, let's say, than things like these GLP-1 analogs, which increase hormone levels to 10, 100,000 kind of fold sometimes. Again, they're looking at glucagon, all sorts of other different gut hormones that may act in ways to really suppress the appetite and cause weight loss through maybe even some physiology we don't fully understand yet. So these drugs are very new. They are very, again, potent, seem to have lots of benefits, especially in our metabolically unhealthy type 2 diabetics, insulin resistant population, may even have some benefit in our otherwise kind of metabolically healthy population. But again, are quite expensive, mostly injectable, and don't really understand the full long-term effects. Do increase, let's say, for certain populations of genetic people, specifically like men syndromes, which are neuroendocrine tumor kind of family passed on endocrine tumors. This can actually increase cancer rates. So again, these are known effects that they have plainly listed on their, drug packaging. So I'm not revealing anything that's not known. But again, not a reason to not prescribe, but well, unless you know that those other things are going on. But yes, has some drawbacks and may not be a lifelong solution. Absorption blockers, so there's orlistat, which is specifically, this is, I'm forgetting the Ally, I think is the other name maybe. But anyway, so this basically blocks fat absorption in the gut. Acarbose does this with carbohydrates, and that's more approved for diabetes. Jardiance and related meds, so SGLT2 sort of class. So these are Jardiance, Invokana, Farxiga, other medicines like this, brand names, block basically glucose reabsorption in the kidney. Again, can lead to modest weight loss, but are not necessarily approved for that. But anything, again, that's causing you to spill calories, yes, of course, can lead to some modest weight loss. Nothing that's really, again, been totally approved just for weight loss in that category. So microbiome here, so feeding those microbes seem to be really beneficial. This is one way to naturally increase GLP we're finding. Right? So rather than taking a huge dose of the hormone, maybe we feed those microbes some fiber, prebiotics, polyphenols is the other major theme here. So this is like your green tea, pomegranate, things that are very sort of sour, colorful, staining kind of things, you know, I would say. So like blueberries, again, are high in antioxidants, blackberries, you know, so then again, these things may benefit our microbes more than they even might benefit us and create all sorts of different beneficial compounds in our gut that prevent colon cancer, that promote, you know, weight loss kind of gut peptides that satisfy our hunger signals, keep us full for longer, do all sorts of things, create better, you know, more neurochemicals, serotonin, dopamine, things like that are made in our gut as well, right? So elevate our mood and our well-being in all sorts of different intricate ways. So really important to feed that microbial environment. How do we use probiotics in this way? We don't quite really know. We see that giving probiotics works while they're giving it. And then as we take those probiotics away, that the environment tends to sort of also have a memory and sort of want to go back to where it was. So basically we want to change some of the inputs is the best kind of data that we have or chance we have. While maybe we add these probiotics, we have to change those habits, right, and give those bacteria sort of environment that they want to live in, essentially. And again, we're still trying to figure out this, so I would say there's not great scientific evidence right now of exactly what you can do. So I would say what I'm saying is mostly what is sort of my expert opinion, let's call it. And again, this is based on some good evidence that we just don't have strong enough for me to say that this is, again, really works in everybody. But again, we see that stress, sleep, exercise habits are also connected with microbiomes, and that, again, is it chicken or the egg? We don't necessarily know. The only chance we have control over is those habits, though. And so we change the habits, and it seems like that the microbiome does sort of follow, right? So sometimes we just have to do the behaviors, and then that sort of reinforces those behaviors, and then we start craving those healthy behaviors actually over a period of time is what I've found. And I think a lot of people in this health and wellness space have found and tell stories about, right, is now we start craving the, you know, exercise or the cold plunge or the sunlight or the sleeping 8 hours a night or the lack of sugar in our diet or etc. Right? Those that now you connect those with that feeling of well-being, and that I would say is the magic of health, right? So increased muscle mass, right? So there are some medical things you can do here. If testosterone is low, you don't always have to take testosterone. If you're in menopause, you don't always have to take estrogen. But again, we can assess these things, do some things. Sunlight, vitamin D, actually it affects estrogen and testosterone, right? So not just taking hormones, but I would say that is a meaningful way to fix some of these issues too, especially let's say you have, you know, you had testicular cancer and you don't have testes, or you have both your ovaries taken out too early, or again, there's things that happen, right, where I would say medically we can really help you out, and it doesn't just have to be sort of suffering in some ways that people do after some of these really terrible events, or just whatever, for maybe not something so traumatic either. So again, we can definitely do some things short of hormones, but or even hormone treatments. Peptides, what I'm referring to here is, you know, growth hormone peptides and other things like this that really can increase muscle mass and other factors there. Again, these are, let's say, more in that performance medicine, and kind of, again, really need to be in folks, in my opinion, that are maybe pulling on some of these other levers we've talked about first. You have to be somewhere sort of a little further along this road to maybe have a lot more benefit here. Otherwise, I feel like, but this can be a nudge to, again, to kind of get you going with some of these behaviors even. So again, it's have a conversation with your doctor. These are are sometimes available, sometimes not, right? These are often, I would say, very, let's say, almost never covered by insurance type programs. So these are things that you would have to have someone who maybe thinks a little bit outside the box and has access to some of these types of things to have access to that. Bariatric surgery, again, this is one of the most, let's say medically, this is, one of the most powerful interventions. And, but it's a really big intervention, right? It's a major surgery. There's a couple different options, Roux-en-Y, gastric sleeves. Those are probably the main two that are used these days. Rearrange the gut in different ways, change different gut hormone signaling, change the size of your stomach, really work through a couple different pathways that we know of. You have to go on a pure liquid diet afterward. There's a lot of psychological and kind of other issues that kind of come up and happen. But again, can really change people's lives, and has to really be coupled with lifestyle changes. And that's a huge part of these clinics nowadays, at least the ones that really are successful, almost always have some sort of lifestyle health coach, even sometimes like psychiatry, psychologist evaluation, right, that does several meetings with you to have this surgery done. And I think that's with some good reasons, right, that you have to, again, change your mindset. A lot of what we talked about today was, again, mindset, not necessarily specifically what to do. I try to give people tools that are applicable to, let's say, 95% of people. And if I just say whatever, eat carnivore, then, only whatever 5 people will listen to me. But again, really, this is a really big tool. We just don't, again, I think there are some things that have to be coupled even with surgery, right, to have success. Any interventions you guys wanted me to talk about or comment on?
I'm going to need to go in about 5-10 minutes.
Short. We'll be done. Yeah, here in just a second. So. Basically, I have just left resources. Okay, so I have plenty of books on my table here in the office. I have a book and podcast list on my website. I try to tell people about resources. I text people resources all the time. If you learn about resources, please share those with me. Again, love to pay that forward to other clients or just to myself or other customers or people in my life, let's just say. Again, I have a lot of influences, people that have really helped me develop everything I do. A couple of these people listed here: Andrew Huberman, Peter Attia, Tim Ferriss. Metabolical, Robert Lustig, I think, has a lot of good work in the eating kind of food, field. Michael Pollan has some really cool work in the food field. So Levels Health blog, that's again, and then Casey Means, who's co-founders of Levels Health, in her book, Good Energy. Again, some really good information there. Glucose Revolution, right? This is a biochemist that also has some kind of hacks and stuff on her website that is, again, science-based and really helps us to manage our eating behavior, right, to play to our advantage, right? And sometimes it's even, her stuff is a lot about like the order of what you're eating, maybe using some lime juice or cinnamon or other things like that, right, to kind of keep those glucose numbers lower and things of that nature. So again, just understanding what is around you, right? And maybe in kind of opposite of leaning into your support system would be leaning out of sort of just the easy way, right? So I think, again, I've really tried to give you a picture of that the food environment is in some ways toxic to your health. And again, it's not intended. I'm not telling you it's nefarious and they're trying to kill you. I'm just telling you they're trying to make money. And again, unfortunately, some of our cheapest kind of convenient options, because of those reasons, because they're highly processed and make them sort of cheap and easy, accessible, etc., also seem to have these negative, the same things that cause them to be that also cause them to be negative towards our health. So just respecting that there's a lot of data that really shows that that's true, and I think a lot of people's practical experience is that this is true. Health coaching. So again, we have something like that available here. There's health coaching all around town, life coaching, all sorts of different things that you can do there. Gyms have things like this as well. So just find someone you trust that you can have a connection with, and that, again, kind of keep you motivated, give you different tools. Different workout apps for movement, right? So just again, this doesn't have to be complicated. It's hard to get things started. So just pick one thing and follow a program, right? There's some 0 to 30 kind of programs. If you're doing nothing each day, it just increases your activity a little bit. There's all sorts of different things out there in the workout kind of exercise place. It's really about setting that mindset and making it a goal. Nutrition, again, I think we've hit on that pretty well, hopefully given people a pretty overview of how to apply some of these types of principles to any kind of named diet, or maybe not even a named diet, right? But just to pick foods that are better for you, that are nourishing for your body, right? Not necessarily just tasty and caloric. And again, you can have some of that too. So, and there's all sorts of ways to keep yourself accountable. Yucca is so chronometer, and these are like times, so like TRE apps, so timed restrictive eating. MyFitnessPal is sort of like more of a dietary caloric restriction kind of app where you can track macros and calories. And then the Yucca app is more about like additives and processing in foods. So all different ways that, people, again, who are taking this data and really doing some cool things and making this accessible for all of us. K-Safe, this is just an interesting product where you can put all sorts of things in it that are locked for a required period of time, and you can't open this box for any reason over that period of time. So let's say you want to allow yourself to have 1 cookie a day, then you put that cookie in there and you set it for 24 hours and it won't open for any reason. So again, so all sorts of different things you can do here, not just maybe with nutrition, but again, maybe more with consumptive behaviors, social media use. Put your phone in there for a couple hours a day or something. Again, so different ways that this can help us really do some self-binding, right, where we kind of hold ourselves accountable here, but maybe not just with willpower, but sort of externalize that willpower, right? Use technology to our advantage rather than to our detriment. So K-Safe is a nice little product like that. Okay, our next talk is going to be in May 9th. My goal is for this talk to actually be Music as Medicine. I may or may not be releasing some music as a part of that talk. So we will see if I can make that happen, but that is my goal. So all of our talks like this go on the YouTube channel. So again, youtube.com/@DesertRiverMed there on the screen. It's on my website. If you go to the Patient Resources tab and you scroll to the bottom, there's a link to my YouTube channel there as well. Again, really appreciate everyone coming out and the fact that I can do this as a part of my practice. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now we just gotta do it.
yeah.
Yeah, no.
Easy piece of cake.